Hey there, boys and girls. Welcome to your Edpuzzle homework tonight, dealing with explaining lesson 10.5. So just like in all of our other explaining lessons, we're going to work through the pages in the book together so that we really understand what it's having us do. So if you have not done so already, please turn to lesson 10.5 in your workbooks. That's page 370 and 371. And please make sure as we're going through this today, you are filling things in and paying attention because it will really help you understand what we're doing as we're working our way through the book. All right, so our learning targets for today are I can represent hundredths as decimal fractions using an area model. So again, same target we've been working on for a while. We're going to talk about the hundredths place in fractions and decimals. And then our second target is I can relate common fractions and decimal fractions. So we're going to talk about how two things can look differently, like a mixed number or a fraction or a decimal, but they still stand for the same thing. All right, so going to move through this pretty quick, explain lesson 10.5. Again, we've got our place value chart here. We know in our base 10 place value, every time you move to the left one place, you're getting 10 times bigger because you need 10 of the object or 10 of the thing that comes before it to make the new thing. Also in base 10, if you're moving to the right, you're dividing by 10 or you're getting 10 times smaller. Meaning if I take one whole and move it one place to the right to the tenths, I'm taking that one whole and breaking it into 10 equal pieces. If I take that tenth and move one place to the right, that's the hundredths place, I'm taking that 1/10 and breaking it into 10 equal pieces. Okay, and today, remember, we're focusing on the hundredths place. Again, kind of like we saw the other day, if you take that ones cube and you magnify or you zoom in on it so that you can see all little teeny tiny 100 pieces that make it up, those little things are considered hundredths because it takes 100 of those little teeny tiny pieces to make one whole. All right, so really what we're looking at today is the different ways to see a decimal or to see the area model that we're looking at. So for example, here in my picture, I see that I have one whole entire square colored in. Remember, the big, large squares equal one whole. So I have one whole square colored in, and then I've got some extra pieces colored in after that. Well, what I'm looking at here is the different ways to see or the different ways to read and write this number. So notice I've got one whole, that's kind of my teal color here, the one whole, and then I've got 25 hundredths or 25 little squares that are also colored in. So that's one way to see this number is seeing the wholes and the extra hundredths that are colored in. Another way to see this number is just by looking at the little teeny tiny pieces. Now again, that would take a long time to count all of those. That's why a strategy like this is probably more beneficial because it doesn't take as long to do. Notice though, they both have the same number of little squares colored in. This one though, we're just focusing on the little teeny tiny hundredths. And here I would have 125 hundredths because I've got 100 little squares colored in here, and then I've got 25 little squares colored in my next shape or my next object. Now, another way we could also view this is by looking at the tenths. And remember, the tenths are those columns that fit inside of your one whole as well. Those are those complete columns. So another way I could see this is I've got 12 tenths because I've got 12 of these columns colored in. So I've got 10 of them here, and then I've got 11, 12. So that's one way I could view this with 12 tenths and then 5 hundredths left over. Again, though, with all three of these pictures on these slides, they all have the same number of squares colored in. They all take up the same amount of space. They all stand for the same number. We're just looking at them differently. Okay? So if you have not done so already, please turn to lesson 10.5, and we're going to be looking at the top of page 370. Okay? In our step in here, it says each large square represents one whole. They want to know how much has been shaded. And then they want to figure out how these numbers down below match the expanders above. So we'll get to those here in a second. The key thing we're focusing on is the different ways to see the number, but remember, they all still represent the same thing. So one way I could view this is with my wholes and extra hundredths. So I know that I've got one whole colored in here. So that would be one whole that I would fill in. And then my extra hundredths would be, well, I know I've got 3 complete columns of 10, so that'd be 30, and then 7 extra ones, so that would be 37 hundredths. That's one way I could view this, 1 whole and 37 hundredths. Another way I could view this is I could just count all those little teeny tiny pieces or those little teeny tiny squares and see how many are colored in. That would take a long time, but I could do it. And notice I'm going to have 137 hundredths. I'm going to have 137 of those little teeny tiny pieces, those little squares. And the last way we talked about is you could focus on your tenths first. So again, notice you're going to have 10 complete columns or 10 complete tenths in your first hole. Then you've got 3 extra columns over here. So that means you would have 13 tenths, 13 complete columns going up and down. And then you're going to have 7 extra hundredths to go with that. Notice we use the same 3 digits in all of our expanders, a 1, a 3, and a 7. They're just in different places, and they're just in different ways for us to see this. So now they want us to figure out, though, how do these number cards match the expander? Well, this number card here says 137 hundredths. That's exactly what this expander tells us. This one here says 1 plus 37 hundredths. Well, that means we're going to go 1 whole plus 37 hundredths. And then my last card here says 13 tenths. And again, I'm just reading the fractions as they look. 13 tenths plus 7 hundredths. That would be this last one here. So again, they all stand for the same thing. They are just different ways to see the number. Okay? All right. So, whoops, I jumped back over here too quick. So we're now going to look at the bottom of page 370 for step up number 1. Okay, and it says each large square represents 1 whole. They want you to complete the missing parts. So notice they gave you the standard form and the word form for this number, but you've got to show how it would look with your area model and then what digits you would put on your expander. So this says 2 wholes and 5. That's the hundredths place, so 5 hundredths. So I would have to color this in so that it shows 2 wholes and 5 hundredths, or 2 wholes and 5 extra pieces. And then I'm going to use those same digits and plug them onto my expander. So 2 wholes, no complete tenths, so I'm not going to have anything in the tenths place beside my 0, because I don't have any complete tenths, and then my 5 extra pieces. That's done. Now, when I look over here at B, though, now they give me the area model, and I've got to come up with the other 3 ways. Well, if I'm looking at this and putting it in standard form, I know that I have 2 wholes colored in, and then I've got some extra, so I'm going to put my decimal point, so 2 and. Now I've got complete tenths, though. I've got 5 complete tenths, so I could leave it like this. I could say 2 and 5 tenths, or I could put a 0 at the end of that and say 2 and 50 hundredths. Either way, they stand for the same thing because 5 tenths is what's colored in here if I'm looking at the things all the way colored in, all the column. Or I've got 50 little teeny tiny squares. Again, I'm going to take those digits and I'm going to plug them onto my expander. So 2 wholes or 2 ones, 5 tenths, and 0 extra hundredths. Or I could look at that as 50 little teeny tiny pieces. And then now if I'm going to type this with words or write this with words, I'm just going to write exactly what I said. 2 and, I need that word and, 50 hundredths. 2 and 50 hundredths. Okay. Again, notice these look very similar, but you've got to pay attention to where that 5 is. Here the 5 is in the hundredths place. That's why we've only got a couple pieces colored in. Here the 5 is in the tenths place. That's why we've got 5 complete columns. So keep that in mind as you're working on this on your own. All right, so we're going to be looking at page 371. And your job for the rest of the day is to do step up number 2, 3, and 4. And really, you're just going to be writing these numbers in different ways. So 2 says read each number name, then write the matching number on the expander. So just like we did here, you're going to read the number name and write it onto your expander. For 3, you're going to write each number in words, so they give it to you in standard form. You've got to write it in words. Make sure you put that word "and" in there. And then when you get down to number 4, it says write the matching decimal fraction in mixed numbers. So they give it to you in word form. You've got to copy down what it would look like as a decimal and then what it would look like as a mixed number. Okay, so keep those in mind as you work on those tonight. Do your best on those. We'll go over those later on. Have a good night. Make smart choices.